For today, we are wrapping up our series, Resurrection Stories, that we've been spending the last few weeks in John's Gospel. And I often feel a little bit, sad isn't really the right word, but it's just kind of like when you come to the end of something that you've been with somebody through for a while, and then it's over, and you kind of have this moment of like there's a finality to it. This is kind of how I always, or often, I guess, feel at the end of a teaching series, because we've kind of shared in something together, and so it's coming to an end today. Over the next couple weeks, in case you are the kind of person that likes to know what's coming, there's going to be just a couple standalone messages, not part of a series, over the next couple Sundays that we'll be into, and then we'll get into something else after that. But for today, we're going to anchor ourselves in John chapter 21. And the last time we were here, this is actually a follow-up conversation to where we were last week. And if you were tracking last week, we found ourselves around the Sea of Galilee again. And this is a few weeks, 2 to 3 probably, after Jesus is resurrected. He tells the disciples, go into Galilee, I'll meet you there. And so they go fishing on Peter's kind of decision. They have this miraculous catch of fish when Jesus shows up on the beach. There's 153 of them to be precise. And then after they eat breakfast together, you remember this? Jesus and Peter go for a walk together on the beach. And when they go for this walk, there's two significant things that happen in the conversation between Jesus and Peter. The first is that Jesus restores Peter after Peter had denied being associated with or even knowing Jesus 3 different times on the night of his betrayal. You remember that? What's the question that Jesus asks Peter? He says, Peter, do you love me? 3 times he asked him, and Peter knows this is connected to his 3 denials. And so Jesus asks this question and then restores Peter. But then after this, there's another thing, or in the middle of it, there's another thing Jesus does. He gives Peter the responsibility of leadership. 3 times he says, feed my sheep, or feed my lambs, or take care of my lambs. This is kind of passing a mantle almost, as it were, and saying to Peter, hey, I am putting you in a place of responsibility and of spiritual authority over the rest, and I want you, now that you've been restored, to strengthen the others in this next while. But there's a part of the conversation last week that we left off that I want to draw attention to for us today, and it starts in verse 18, right after, and this is kind of mid-conversation where Jesus, after the 3rd time, he has said to Peter, feed my sheep, after asking him 3 times, do you love me? And Peter says, of course, you know I love you, you know I love you. After all of these things happen, Jesus follows feed my sheep with these words. He says to Peter, truly, truly, which, by the way, is a verbal signal. Truly, truly. We see this throughout the Gospels. Every once in a while, Jesus will say, truly, truly. Or if you're reading the King James, it's verily, verily, I say unto thee. Or truly, truly, I tell you. This is a verbal signal or a verbal cue to say, hey, what I'm about to say is very important, so pay attention. Pay really close attention. And what I'm about to say is not only true, but it's worth paying attention to. And he says, truly, truly, to Peter, I say to you, when you were young, you used to dress yourself and walk wherever you wanted. What is he talking about? Well, he's talking about this kind of generality of the personal autonomy and self-determination that comes with youth. Anybody know what I'm talking about? No? Yes? Okay. So anybody kind of longing for those days again, maybe from time to time, right? When you were younger, okay, and we're not talking like really young, because at some point your parents had to dress you and take care of you and feed you, and but you eventually grow out of that into kind of a self-autonomous person, and you can kind of make decisions on your own, and you can go places on your own, and you have this sense of freedom, and while there's still a responsibility with that freedom, there's a sense of self-direction that I can kind of decide where I want to go and what I want to do and how I want to spend my time and the friends that I'm going to be with, and that's not kind of all appointed to me. I can make those decisions on my own. And so Jesus is kind of making this general statement about this. I was thinking about this fact earlier this week, and I was remembering when I was in grade 12 in the late 1900s. I graduated from high school in 1999. I mean, what a class to be a part of, right? So that's why I graduated high school. And I remember during those years, during my grade 12 year, I was thinking, okay, I'm going to graduate from high school. I'm taking a trip. That's what I'm going to do. I'm old enough. I've got a job. I'm making money. I'm going to take a trip. And so I had planned. I had never been to British Columbia. And that's where I was going. Now, in those days, you didn't plan a trip on your smartphone. It was 1999, after all. There wasn't even a smartphone, to my knowledge. The smartphone didn't come out until the early 2000s, a whole other millennia away. So here we are, and so I'm trying to figure out, how do I plan a trip to British Columbia? What do I need to do? And so I just kind of set out on my own in my grade 12 year. And so I did what any traveling person would have done in those days. I found a toll-free number to Department of Vacations, I don't know what it was called then, in British Columbia, tourism, right, called BC Tourism, and I said to the nice lady on the phone, I said, I would love to book a trip to come visit your beautiful province. I'm graduating this June, and I want to come out there in the summer. And she says, well, that's wonderful to hear. What would you like to be part of your trip? And so I kind of shared a few things, as I knew some people had been there, and I talked about some things. So I did what most normal people did. I ordered brochures from Tourism BC. And a couple weeks later, guess what showed up in the mail? These beautiful brochures of nice coastlines. And so I started flipping through and planning out, what did I want to do? I knew there's a few hikes I wanted to go on. I figured I could take my golf clubs with me. And so I started planning this thing. I called Air Canada, because again, you didn't book online, right? We only had dial-up internet then. And it would have taken I don't even know if you could have booked a flight online then. And so I called Air Canada, and I waited on the phone forever, and I said, I'm flying from, I want to fly to BC. And so I kind of figured out how much that was going to cost. I even called golf courses to see what their green fees were. I had planned hikes. How was I going to get around? Where was I going to stay? I had this whole thing mapped out that I was going to go on this trip, and it was going to be incredible. And I found, as I got to the end of getting ready to figure out, okay, when am I going to go? And is this exactly the trip I want to take? I suddenly came to the realization I'd be going all by myself because I hadn't asked anyone to go with me. And figure it wasn't going to be as fun of a trip, and so I didn't go at all. That's what happened. All that to tell you, it just ended in one big disappointment. But, and I've never been to BC, actually, by the way, so if anyone wants to go, anyway, here, we're going to have a big church road trip here this summer, okay? So, yeah, so here's the thing. I had planned this all, but here's what I figured out during that time is that I could have done this. I was able to do it. I could take myself, as it were, almost wherever I wanted to go. And Jesus is kind of tapping into this general truism. He's saying, look, when you were younger, you had the whole world in front of you. You could decide where you wanted to go. You could walk wherever you wanted to walk, Peter. That's how it worked. But then he says in the rest of the verse, but when you are old, so Peter's now in the in-between. When you're old, Peter, you're going to stretch out your hands, and another person is going to dress you and carry you where you do not want to go. Now, this might hit a little harder, but again, generally true about Peter, that with age and with other things, you progressively lose that autonomy. You progressively lose that self-determination. When you're single, and you've got, a whole bunch of things going for you, there's a lot of great things. Then when you start dating, you start being preoccupied with how you're going to spend your Friday night or your Saturday night, or there's a little more layers, a few more layers to the decision, right? And then you get married and you have a spouse that preoccupies a lot of your time, and that relationship is kind of the center of everything begins to kind of work around that. And then you have kids, and then not only that, again, some of you know, you get grandkids, and even that adds a whole other layer to where your priorities lie, where your time is spent, where your money goes, all of those things. And as you get older, eventually, with health and other things, other layers start to complicate what you're able to do. So it might be, and I've heard people talk about this, I don't know how many more times we're going to be able to travel because the insurance costs have gotten so high that I don't know if we can afford it with the risk. My health doesn't permit me to fly long flights. In fact, my health kind of keeps me closer to home. There might be other things, and eventually, and this isn't true for everybody, but it's a general truism, that eventually somebody else begins to make decisions for you. And I can't imagine what it's like to get to that place where someone else is making those decisions, or where you have to be the person making the decisions for the someone else. And while these things are broadly true as Jesus talks about them, he's speaking specifically to Peter in this moment. And John gives us some insight as to what Jesus is really nailing down on when it comes to what he's saying to Peter. He says, look, you were young, you can go wherever you want. When you're old, you're going to stretch out your hand. Someone else is going to lead you to a place you don't want to go. And this is what Jesus, or John then tells us about what Jesus actually meant. This he said to show by what kind of death that he, Peter, was to glorify God. How Peter's end in this life on this planet was going to come. The end of Peter's story isn't going to be Peter's decision. And church tradition says that Peter was actually crucified upside down in Rome about 30 years after this. And so Jesus is saying, not just generally to Peter, but specifically, Peter, hey, here's how your life is going to come to an end. Here's how you will glorify God in the way that you die. And after saying this to Peter, if you know that this is going to be your end, Jesus still looks him in the eye and says, Peter, follow me. This has been the invitation from the beginning. In fact, in Mark chapter 1, verse 16, we read early on in the days of Jesus calling his disciples, and it says that Jesus was passing alongside this same Sea of Galilee that he's walking with Peter along here now. I don't know if it's the exact same spot, but it's the same setting, same sea, same, right? And so he's walking along, and he said to Simon and Andrew, this is 3 years earlier, the brother of Simon. So Simon and Andrew, they were throwing their nets into the sea. They were fishermen, and Jesus came, and he said to them, follow me, and I'll make you fishers of men. And what did they do? Well, they immediately left their nets and followed Jesus. And going a little further, he saw James, the son of Zebedee, and John, his brother, who were in their boat mending their nets. And immediately he called them. I think same invitation, come follow me. I'll make you fishers of men. And immediately he called them, and they left their father Zebedee in the boat with their hired servants. And they did what? They followed Jesus. That was the invitation in the beginning. That was, in fact, it's not even just an invitation. It is an invitation, but the way it's worded is that there's an authoritative weight to it. It's actually written as what we call an imperative or a command. That's kind of this invitation command all come together. It's like, come follow me. But if you're going to follow me, then it's actually follow me, right? It's not kind of as you like it or when you think it's going to be good. And Jesus never intended that their following or that our following of him would ever be half-hearted. He never intended, hey, come follow me as an invitation, but just, whenever it's convenient for you, whatever life stage that you're in, when you feel ready, you have all kinds of things kind of set in order, then come follow me. It's not, hey, when it's just simply safe to do so, come follow me. Not when it's going to be profitable for you or your life or your reputation or your bank account or your health or all of the rest. It's not when you're going to simply receive some personal benefit out of following me that you should come and follow me. The invitation / command is come and follow me. And it's never meant to be half-hearted. Because following Jesus, according to Jesus, looks like denying yourself. Taking up your cross every day to follow him. And it's of no value to you or to me or to anyone else to gain the whole world or even part of the world or everything that you ever wanted out of life and yet in the process lose your own soul. That's never meant to be. That's never been the intention that Jesus would have, is that we would only follow him when it's convenient, safe, profitable, when we're ready, or some kind of personal benefit. It is in all the places, in all the things, and in all of the ways. And in this moment, Jesus is telling Peter, hey, Peter, follow me, but let me also tell you where this is all headed. It's eventually going to lead you, Peter, to a place that you don't want to go. And someone else is going to make the decision about how your end comes. And then Peter does something that we all do to varying degrees. Okay? So track with this. He then, knowing all of this and hearing all this from Jesus, what does he do? He looks around and he begins comparing his life to the person who's in close proximity to him. What does he say? Peter turned and saw the disciple whom Jesus loved following them. Now, this is John, right? We know this is the same John that was with his brother James, who was fishing with their dad Zebedee, that followed Jesus after Peter and his brother Andrew followed Jesus. They all, kind of on that same day, they all followed. It's just that same John who's writing this gospel and this account for us about what happened in the life of Jesus. John who's wanting to be clear that, hey, I'm writing this so that you would believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you would have life in his name. It's that same John. John is kind of walking behind, and Jesus and Peter are talking together, and after Jesus tells Peter what he does, Peter kind of looks over his shoulder and he sees John walking with them, and just to be clear, it's the one who had leaned back against him during supper and said, Lord, who is it that's going to betray? We know this is John. And so Peter then says to Jesus, right, after seeing John, the first person I think that he looks at, he says, Lord, what about this man? Well, what's going to happen to John? You've told me what's going to happen to me. What's going to happen to John? I want to know. But based on Jesus' response, it seems that the question Peter asks is a little more complex and layered than we might initially think. This isn't just a question of curiosity. This isn't just a question of Peter being a little bit nosy. Well, this is my lot. This is what's going to happen with me according to Jesus. Jesus, tell me what's going to happen to John. I just would like to know. I'm just kind of curious about that. No. Peter isn't looking for information necessarily about what's going to happen to John. He's starting to measure his own life by comparing it to someone else's walk with Jesus. And so Jesus looks at Peter and says, if it's my will that he remains until I come, what is that to you? If he stays alive until I return, Peter, you know that in the end you're going to be led to a place that you don't want to go. But if it's my determination that John outlives you and lives longer, and that I return while John is still alive and John doesn't actually taste death, if that's what's going to happen to John, which, by the way, this might be a little too much for some of us, but what happened to John in the end? Does anybody know? He survived being put into a vat of really hot, perhaps even boiling oil. They tried to kill him that way, and it didn't work. And so then he was exiled to a labor mine on Patmos. That's what happened to John in the end. He died an old man. It was on Patmos that he actually received that revelation that has now been called the book of Revelation. It's Jesus' revelation to John. But all that to say, but Jesus, nobody knew this at this point, at least Peter didn't. And so Jesus says to him, like, what's it matter to you? What happens to John if he outlives you or is here until I return? Why does that matter? Peter, what consequence does that have for how you will live your life? You do what? Follow me. He repeats the command. It's the thing that Jesus said just a few moments ago to him, follow me. And when he asks about John, Jesus simply says, you, Peter, follow me. He's trying to recalibrate Peter's thinking, but it doesn't quite connect, I don't think, because instead of dropping the issue then and there, it seems that Peter struggled to let it go. How do we know that? Well, John says, as he writes, by the way, out of all of this, rumors started to spread that I just want to clear up. I love how John adds these things. This is what he says, verse 23. So the saying, because of this conversation, the saying began to spread abroad among the brothers. So it's not contained. The conversation or the thinking that John's about to tell us, the impression or the idea about what's going to happen to John didn't end there with that conversation. It started trending. It was all over the internet, as it were. Said among the brothers, it's kind of, again, widely spread, that this disciple was not going to die. That John would actually be alive. This is a wrong interpretation of Jesus' words. It's a wrong conclusion that was drawn because of something that Jesus said. But John tells us, but Jesus did not say to him that he was not to die. Actually, I think that would make a great teaching series, stuff Jesus didn't say, that people think that he did say. But John's saying, look, I'm here to address and clear up the rumors. Jesus didn't say that he was not to die, but if it's my will that he remain until I come, what is that to you? Again, what is John doing? He's reinforcing the thing that Jesus is telling Peter, and I think for all of those who will read John's gospel, what does it matter to you what happens with somebody else and their life and faith? Now, this isn't that we don't care about people, that we don't care about their faith, that we don't try to encourage and come alongside, that we don't be the body of Christ, it's not to say any of that, but what he's saying is don't let that get in the way of you following me. What he's saying is that you are not to measure your own walk with Christ by comparing it to someone else's walk with Christ, because your calling and my calling is not comparison. It's commitment. Or maybe we could put it this way. If we just stop scrolling and start following. If you're tracking with that, anybody, does that help? Is that helpful? Because here's what happens with comparison. When we start to compare, we lose sight of our own sense of commitment. And what we begin to measure our life and faith and following by is how well we're doing compared to the next person, not based on what Jesus has called us into. If we keep scrolling, what we end up doing is looking at what everybody else has going on, and we just either start comparing and we ourselves stop following. And so we used to call this keeping up with the Joneses. Anybody, you all remember that? Okay, so what did that look like? Oh, well, the next door neighbor's got a bigger porch. They tore off the old one, and now they got this nice, beautiful, bigger porch. They got a big green egg on it over on the side, right? They're cooking up some good barbecue. We've just got this barbecue that's 10 years old, a little charcoal thing. It doesn't even really cook our steak as well. And look at our little porch that we got here. You know, it doesn't even have a roof over it to keep the rain off. You got to go out. The other day, Carolyn said when the power went out, she was in the middle of cooking hamburger on the stove. Right? And it's like salmonella all over the place. Right? It's not going to happen. We can't just kind of leave this. Right? And so then she's like, you know, you should just go out and barbecue some hamburgers. And I looked outside and I'm like, I'll be holding an umbrella while I do so. And so there I was out on my porch in the umbrella, cooking supper on the barbecue. Glad to do it, by the way. Mostly. They got a pool in their backyard. We still got to go down to the beach or the lake. Did you see their new kitchen, by the way? A lovely island in the middle. The cupboards are done up nice. Got these fancy drawers that you can slam them and they don't slam shut. They just kind of slowly ease in. See the vacation they went on? So lovely. The new car they bought. And can you humor me for a second? I can't keep talking about the vibe in church, but the thing's 20 years old. It's got a sunburn on the hood, right? Like the paint is all discolored. Looks better in the rain, by the way. It's chipped up. The window sometimes leaks into around the top of the door, and you got to kind of take the plastic off and shake the water out and put it back up. And then lately it's developed this rattle, so as soon as you start it up, you hear this under the floor, and then you start going. Eventually it goes away. The AC quit a while back. Earlier this spring, I think it was, Carolyn called me from Cape Island and said, I think the car smells like it's burning. And I said, okay. She said, do you think it's going to make it home? I said, I don't know. Do you want me to come get it and drive it home for you? So I did, and anyway, I drove it home. There wasn't a problem with it. I didn't smell anything. Took it to the garage anyway, and they said, yeah, actually the clutch on your air conditioner's gone. So if you had the air conditioner button pushed, that's probably what you smelled, because it was trying to do its thing. And anyway, and so she wasn't wrong. There was something going on with that, and so like they said, we can replace it, and you can recharge your AC and do all the things. It's gonna be a couple $1,000s. Like, I wouldn't do it myself. Car's in great shape otherwise, but whatever. But the whole time I was driving home from Cape Island on the highway, I kept thinking, if there's a burning smell, and then the car caught fire, and I had to pull over, wouldn't that be the best ending to that story? Going out in a blaze of glory. That'd be like the most epic ending of that car's life. I think it would be. And so we've started looking, and that's a whole other saga about patience and all the rest that I think we're going to have to come up at some point. But we test drove another vehicle because there's huge discounts on it. We ended up not buying it, but because it's too expensive for what we wanted. But we got into the car. It was an Equinox, and the kids got in the back, and they're like, "What's this button?" And they push it, and they're like, there's heated seats in the back. They were pumped. And every car that was the first one, every car we've test driven since, the first thing they do is get in the back and go, are there heated seats? And we say, no, there are not. And they say, this is the worst car. We're not buying this car. Okay, that took way too long in that. But here's what happens. And so we start looking around for cars. And it's like, well, what are we going to get? What's going to fit? What's good? To me right now, driving the Vive is almost a badge of honor. Just kind of, we've crossed that threshold a long time ago. Like, this is so awesome. We get to drive this beater of a car. But here's what happens. And so it's not just looking around at your neighbors, but again, with the social media piece, all you see on social media is the highlight reels of everybody else's life. And you can doom scroll yourself into a mild depression in, just a few minutes. It's not that hard to do. And then with all of the above that you see what everybody else has going on, it's like, look at the amazing date night that they have. Look at the impressive talent that person has that I do not. Look at the picture perfect moment of that family and what they had going on. And you do not want to take any pictures of what was going on with our family. It would just be the worst mess. Because here's what comparison does. Comparison assigns values to other people, whether for better or for worse, by the way. And then out of that, we begin to assign value to ourselves. Well, they've got it better, or we've got it better. Comparison works both ways. And you know that comparison has started to happen for you when you start saying things like, but what about fill in the blank. And comparison becomes for us a distraction from what God has called you to be, me to be, you to do, me to do, from what God has called you to do and be. It becomes a distraction from your life because you simply start looking at the person closest to you and say, how do I measure up? And when it comes to following Jesus, Jesus is just clear with Peter, hey, Peter, look, it's not about what's going to happen to John or anyone else. You follow me. And listen, you and I are not called to measure our lives by what happens to everyone else around us. Your success is not measured by a particular standard of living. Your call is to simply trust and follow Jesus wherever that leads you and whatever the cost is.